The W126 was the go-to Mercedes for most of the tuners back in the 80s, but lots of tuners also tuned 124s, and some of these cars were as crazy as the 1000 SALs. So hello guys and welcome back to another video, and here are the crazy 124s. I will start this video of course with AMG, since they were the main and the biggest tuner. The first AMG 124 was the 3.2, based on the 300E, and was introduced in 1985, right after the 124 went into production. The 300E used the 3-liter version of the M103. Thanks to a new low-throw camshaft, the capacity was increased to 3208 cc. All this raised the power from 185 horsepower to 240 horsepower, and from 192 pound-foot of torque to 239 pound-foot of torque. Thanks to this additional power, the top speed was at 220 km per hour, and the acceleration time at 6 seconds. The 300E 3.2 AMG came standard with a ducktail spoiler and side skirts, but of course front and rear bumpers were available. Like most of the AMGs of the 80s, most of the time the grille was painted black. The interior was fairly simple, not a lot was changed, but if you wanted you could get Recaro seats and some other toys. Most of the 3.2 AMGs were sedans, but if you wanted you could get the car as a wagon or a coupe. In 1989 AMG presented the 300E 3.4. which was based on the 300E24, which used the new 4-valve M104 engine. This, differently from the 3.2, when AMG only increased the stroke, this time they also raised the bore, creating this way a 3310 cc. But they called it 300E 3.4. Thanks to this, the power went up to 265 horsepower and the torque to 243 pound-foot of torque. The 3.4 could hit 100 in 5.8 seconds and had a top speed of over 250 km per hour. But these were entry-level models. If you wanted true power, the V8 powered 124s were the answer for you. The V8 Mercedes engine of the time was the 2-valve M117. AMG had two ways to gain more power: increase the displacement or convert the engine into a 4-valve. AMG decided to convert the engine into a 4-valve first and later to increase the displacement. Converting the M117 engine into a 4-valve wasn't the easiest thing to do, since the engine had to be completely re-engineered. Originally, AMG used the engine for the 126 and the R107, and later they started using the V8 for the 124s. This happened because AMG had to further develop the 124. Since the car wasn't built for V8s, but for straight 4s and straight 6. This was also a problem that Mercedes faced when they were developing the 500E. When the engine was put in place, the power output was at 335 horsepower and the torque at 337 pound-foot of torque. Again, you could get the 5.0 with any body style you wanted. The body kit was still quite similar with the body kit of the straight 6 AMGs. After the 5.0 came the 5.4. AMG increased the displacement even more, by raising again the bore and the stroke. Sadly, not much information exists about this car, but the true mad 124 came in 1986, when the 5.6 aka Hammer was presented. This car used the 5.6 liter version of the M117 that Mercedes presented in 1985. AMG decided to convert the engine into a 4-valve and not to increase the displacement. This increased the power output to 350 horsepower and the torque to 358 pound-foot of torque. All this lowered acceleration time to 5 seconds and raised the top speed to over 290 km per hour. These numbers were just crazy back then, and even for today. The next step was to increase the displacement of the 5.6 liter engine. AMG bored out the cylinders, creating this way a 5953cc engine. This engine was offered as a 2-valve but also as a 4-valve. The 2-valve was a cheaper version and of course offered less power. The 6-liter 2-valve version had 328 horsepower and 387 pound-foot of torque. But if you wanted true performance, the 6-liter 4-valve was the real deal. The Hammer 6.0 had 375 horsepower and 417 pound-foot of torque. The acceleration time still was at 5 seconds. Meanwhile, the top speed was at over 300 km per hour. All the Hammers were available with all body styles, but most of them came as 4-door sedans. The body kits were some of the wildest 124 body kits of the time. Ultra-wide fenders, bumpers, side skirts and ducktail spoilers were part of the package. The interior was the standard AMG interior of the 80s, plenty of leather and Recaro seats. In 1993, 2 new models replaced the old ones. These models were now built under the new partnership between AMG and Mercedes. The new straight 6 was the E36. The engine was based on the 3.2-liter version of the M104 family. Both bore and stroke were increased to give a total capacity of 3606 cc, which gave 270 horsepower and 285 pound-foot of torque. The acceleration time was at 7 seconds and the top speed was limited to 250 km per hour. Because of the new partnership with Mercedes, AMG had to limit the top speed to 250 km per hour now. The final AMG 124 came in 1993, when the E60 was introduced. The E60 followed the Hammer, but this time the engine was the new Mercedes V8 M119. The E60 was based on the E500, so AMG didn't have a lot of work to do. The 5956cc engine now produced 380 horsepower and 346 pound-foot of torque. Again, because of the new partnership with Mercedes, AMG had to limit the top speed, and also the engine had to be built by Mercedes standards, so the car ended up having less power than the previous Hammers. Most of the E60s were sedans, since the E500 came only as a sedan, but probably some wagons, coupes and maybe convertibles were built with this engine. The body kits were very simple for this car, so they looked basically like normal E500s. The next big tuner was of course Brabus, and they built probably the craziest 124. The first Brabus 124 was the 3.5. The 3.5 had something around 240 horsepower, could hit 100 in 6.6 seconds and had a top speed of 250 km per hour. But this car only was in production for a short time. This engine was replaced by the 3.6. Originally, these cars were built with a M103 2-valve engine, which produced something around 245 horsepower, but later this engine was replaced by the M104 4-valve engine. And probably together with the new engine the power was increased. For both cars the top speed was at over 200 km per hour. Sadly, not much information exists about these cars. The body kits of these cars were not the craziest ones, but side skirts, bumpers and a black grille were part of the package. Like AMG Brabus also offered 6-liter 124s. This car had around 410 horsepower, which was way more than the Hammer. But while AMG stopped at 6-liter, Brabus went further, with the first car being the E6.5. The capacity of the engine was at 6409 cc, and had 445 horsepower, something that helped the car to reach 100 in 5.2 seconds, and had a top speed of over 280 km per hour. But if the V8s weren't your cup of tea, Brabus had the answer for you. Since in the early 90s they started using the M120 V12 engines. But these engines weren't powerful enough for Brabus standards, so they increased the capacity from 5,987 cc to 6,871 cc. This was just mental. The 6.9 had 500 horsepower, 520 pound-foot of torque, a top speed of over 290 km per hour, and could hit 100 in 4.6 seconds. But not all the owners were happy with this car, so some of them asked Brabus for more power, and so the E7.3 was born. This car had 520 horsepower and 555 pound-foot of torque, while the top speed was at over 300 km per hour, and the acceleration time was at 4.4 seconds. You could get this car in any body style you wanted. Sedan, wagon, didn't matter. As long as you had the money to pay, Brabus would do it for you. While the engines became bigger and bigger and the power went up, the body kits didn't change much. Most of the V8s and V12 Brabus were based on the E500, and the style was mostly the same. Maybe a new front bumper here and a rear bumper there, but nothing crazy. Probably because the owners wanted a sleeper look in order to have the perfect autobahn destroyer. Carlsson also offered their 124s. Carlsson was a newcomer in the game, since they were founded only in 1989, but beside this, their 124s were some of the best. Their first car was the C300, which was based on the 300E, which had 245 horsepower. Later on, Carlsson introduced the C3524, which had 280 horsepower and 261 pound-foot of torque, something that helped the car to reach a top speed of 250 km per hour and had an acceleration time of 7.1 seconds. Later on came the C3624, which had a slightly bigger engine and had 290 horsepower. Like AMG and Brabus prior to them, Carlsson also had their MED 124s. The C62 had the M119 V8 engine, but the displacement was increased to 6,207 cc and produced 415 horsepower. Oettinger is another known German tuner, mostly about the Audis and Volkswagens, but back in the day they also tuned Mercedes. Like the others, they used the 300E as a base and increased the capacity to 3.6 liters. The 3.6 had 230 horsepower, a top speed of 250 km per hour and could hit 100 in 7.1 seconds. Their cars were very simple, with only a Oettinger 3.6 sticker being the sign that the car was tuned. Tomi Kaira also started tuning 124s in the late 80s. The Tomi Kaira M30E was based on the 300E, and the Stray 6 had received a number of different modifications, which raised the maximum power output to 220 horsepower. The car also received a nice body kit with a small rear wing. Also, the car had received a pair of side silver stripes, something common with Tomi Kaira cars back in the 90s. Renntech started offering their 124s in the early 90s. The Renntech 600E used the enlarged version of the 5-liter M119 engine. They originally were using this engine for the Renntech 600 SL, but they decided to use this engine also for the 124s, since everyone was doing that. This engine produced 381 horsepower and 402 pound-foot of torque. The top speed was at over 250 km per hour and the acceleration time at 5 seconds. The body kit and wheels came from AMG, so the car looked very similar with the Hummers. The Koenig 124s were probably the most unique ones. Differently from the others, Koenig didn't increase the displacement, but they turbocharged the 300e, something that brought the power up to 300 horsepower, the top speed to 260 km per hour, and lowered the acceleration time to 6.2 seconds. Also, a twin turbocharged version was available, with 345 horsepower. In typical Koenig style, the 124s came with ultra-wide body kits, and sometimes with Testarossa side strikes. Lotek also turbocharged their 124s. Lotek turbocharged the 300Es and the 320Es, and looks like the power was between 315 to 330 horsepower, but not much information exists about these cars. The body kit depended on your taste. You could get a car with no body kit at all, with body kit, or even with the R129 front end. Now these were more performance tuners, but like with the 126 they were a lot of tuners that offered only body kits or more luxurious trims. Lorenzer and Zender were two of the biggest tuners, and they offered some of the best kits. Their 124s looked classy, but still with some sporty touches. These kits offered new front and rear bumper, side skirts and a small rear spoiler. Also, a new lower suspension was available by Lorenzer. Expression Motorsport, a Belgian tuner, offered some of the weirdest conversions. They offered kits which made the car to look like a R129. Part of this kit were the new bonnet, which looked like the bonnet of the R129, and new bumpers and new side skirts. But while tuners like Expression used the bonnet of the R129, tuners like CDS Sport went and used the complete front end of the R129, including here the bonnet, headlights, front fenders and bumpers. The rear end of the car had also received a new weird trunk with a built-in spoiler. Another weird CDS 124 had received a body kit which made the car to look like a 126. Bochoret was another tuner that used the look of the R129 for his cars, but he went a big step further, since beside the front end of the R129 he also packed the 124 with gullwing doors. A lot of work was put into making this car, since Bochoret had to place the C-pillar 25 cm further in order to make the gullwing doors work. This conversion was very expensive, and since the car didn't offer lots of performance, not many B300s were sold. But Bochoret built a number of 124s with just the front end of the R129. Dena Glorera, a Japanese tuner, probably made the weirdest and the worst 124. This car was completely redesigned. The only way you could tell that this car was a 124 was only by the structure of the car. The body kit made the car to look like a retro looking car, but ended up in a terrible way. Also, some 1000 SAL tuners built a version of the 124s. The first was Trasco, which built a stretch version of the car. This was completely different from the 6-door long wheel-based 124s that many coach builders offered. The car came with a similar trim with a 1000 SAL, TV, phone, hi-fi stereo system and more wood trim. The exterior was basically stock, nothing was touched. Karat by Ducatelet built some of the weirdest 1000 SALs. Their style was quite exaggerated, even for 1000 SAL standards, but their 124 was very interesting. Body kit was very simple, and the car looked basically stock. The interior on the other side was completely different. The dashboard was completely covered in real wood now. Phone, a new center armrest, and some cars even came with CRT TV. From crazy power to ultra luxury, these were the crazy 124s. So guys, thank you for watching. See you next time.